York City. Tunick is also executive producer of the IMC Expo, a show about innovations in art and technology held annually at the Chelsea Art Museum in New York City, featuring artists and programmers from all over the world. Tunick also produced a 3-month studio IMC show called Beyond TV at the Museum of Television and Radio in New York City. His work has been featured in many diverse venues, including Rolling Stone magazine, I like it next to the Museum of Modern Art, and in the book, Virtual Sets and Pre-Visualization for Games, Movies and the Web by Jean-Marc Gaultier. James Tunick's art and technology projects have also been featured in such diverse locations as the Time Warner Center, Times Square, and in numerous cities across the United States, including Philadelphia, Dallas, Boston, and Chicago. He's been discussed in the LA Times, on NY1 News, the Discovery Channel, and the Sony News Network. He is a lead developer for Studio IMC technologies like IMC TV, an interactive media player being used for the signs in Times Square. He also has a patent pending with more software in the pipeline, and he is currently raising capital to open a Studio IMC research lab and gallery in New York City with his business partner, Tony Rizzero. So it's my great pleasure, virtually, to come through a conference, to welcome James Tunick. And James, may I say, we're very sorry that you weren't able to join us in person, but this is even more in keeping with the theme of the show, as much as we hope you'll come and visit.
Indeed, I look forward to it. Thank you so much for having me. First and foremost, I'd like to thank USF Institute for Research in Art and Contemporary Art Museum and Isabel especially for including me in this incredible show. Again, I am so sorry I can't be there today. Again, I'm held up in New York and I was ill this week, so unfortunately I'm going to do this virtually. Again, quite fitting considering the subject of the show. Essentially, I am the creator of a work in this room called Cityscapes. Co-creator of a work called Parallel Cityscapes. My co-artist's name is Tunick. He is a very well-established researcher and fine artist living in Germany currently. He has his master's from Kinetic, the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne, which is one of the top universities there in media arts and technology. And again, as was introduced, my background is Yale as an undergraduate, and I got my master's at NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program. So as we go here, I'm going to have to say next 5 weeks, and I guess we'll go ahead to slide 1. So I guess Dr. Grafton was able to go through a rather lengthy explanation of what stereoscopics are, and of course my explanation here will not do that justice at all, but I'll briefly go over what the meaning of stereoscopics is. And essentially it's 3D imaging technique used to create illusion of depth in a photograph, in a movie, or another two-dimensional image. You see an example of stereograph on the left side. Unfortunately, I was unable to see the presentation. I could hear Dr. Grafton's presentation. But I think perhaps the more appropriate contemporary example of where stereoscopics are used are IMAX movie theaters. Of course, everybody's familiar with putting on the goggles and seeing the images pop out of the screen. I think that's probably the best contemporary example of where we see stereoscopics being used. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'm really talking about the definition of immersion. Immersion is really where the image appears to surround the user. And I've got a few examples below, including Michael Amar's Movie Map, which is really the predecessor of Google 360. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Google's new technology. In addition to the cave automatic virtual environment. Next slide, please. An immersive environment dates back to the earliest cave and are the antecedents of virtual reality. Here are a number of examples, including some of the first paintings from Lascaux, France, dating up to paintings from the Roman Republic, through 19th century panoramas, and really you see that there is a long history in art using immersion as a technique to draw the visitor into the painting and really blur the distinction between real space and image space. It's no longer an image, it becomes an actual space, it becomes an actual experience, and goes beyond the surface of the wall. Next slide, please. Christiane Paul, who is the new media curator at Whitney Museum, I think has a very interesting and broad definition for virtual environments. And she says that virtual environments can be anything ranging from virtual reality to the internet itself, or data visualization models. She claims that virtual reality and cyberscape promise to provide users with a three-dimensional interaction experience. The illusion they are inhabiting a world rather than observing it. And I think that that's very, very interesting, especially in light of the subject of the show. Next slide, please. So again, to kind of define what is virtual reality? What is this word that's kind of commonly used, misused? I think that one of the best ways to explain virtual reality is on this kind of sliding scale. That virtual reality can really be understood at one extreme, with reality on the other extreme. Between virtual reality and reality, you have what's called augmented reality. And a good example of augmented reality is in the image on the left side, where you see an image of the city with graphics overlay. And again, it's not totally virtual, it's not, a video game, but it's not totally real either. It's really kind of this seamless melding of virtual real. And again, I'm sorry that image is a little small. I have a few more examples coming up a little later on that will better illustrate that point. And I think ultimately the thesis and the point of my presentation is really that, and perhaps the entire show, that stereoscopics and immersion and new types of mixed reality can really serve heightened awareness and transform our perception not only of the world around us, but also of people around us and the ideas around us. Next slide, please. So in the next part of the presentation, I'm going to give some contemporary examples of immersive environments. Next slide, please. This is an example of a curved immersive environment. This is used in education. Next slide, please. This is an example of a mobile immersive environment. This is something that can be moved from space to space. It folds up. Next slide, please. This is an example of an immersive room called the cave. And this is probably one of the most advanced forms of virtual reality. It also uses stereoscopics, rather advanced form of stereoscopics, using something called active stereoscopics, where you're wearing what are called sunglasses. And essentially you have projections of all the walls around you, on the floor, on the ceiling. And within the goggles, there's also a position sensor. So depending on your perspective, whether you're crouching down or standing up, the perspective of graphics within the environment changes with you. So really your body becomes attached to this virtual environment in a really interesting way. Next slide, please. These are other types of immersion that we see being used in everyday applications. Flight control, mission control. Many large companies use it to monitor equipment. And again, I just want to kind of broaden the definition of immersion. And obviously, in this show, we're talking mostly in the context of art. It's interesting to look at some of the different ways in which immersion is used to change our perception of large data sets, to better understand the people and the information around us. And really, it's a method of heightening our awareness of information and people and the world around us. Next slide, please. These are some examples of dome immersive documents. Again, showing a much different format from the cube cave environment that I showed earlier. Next slide, please. And these are some very popular examples. Some of you may have seen some of the videos of multi-touch screen on YouTube and some recent releases by Microsoft. Some very interesting research being done by a man named Jeff Hahn, who also attended IU and was part of the Center for Advanced Technology there. And he developed technology that allows multiple people to walk up to an immersive screen at once and interact with multiple fingers, multiple hands, and it's really very reminiscent of Minority Report. I'm sure many of you have seen the film that Steven Spielberg directed, where Tom Cruise is grabbing images on the screen and moving them across. And I really think that this is in a lot of ways symbolic of what the future of immersive environments will look like, both in art, research, education, and in a number of other areas. Next slide, please. This is an example of a project developed by a researcher who also went to NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program. And this is actually a good example of an augmented reality application. This is a video game that takes place in the streets of Manhattan, and it actually uses cell phones, so there are no immersive screens. But you might think of it as a type of augmented immersive environment because you're actually in the city, you're immersed by the game. Other players are your friends. You can see Pac-Man running around in the center, and the ghosts are at top right and bottom right, and you see Washington Square Park there in the center of the map. And again, this idea that the real city and virtual world are beginning to merge. Again, I think this is a very early example of what augmented reality can mean in the future, but I think a very important example in that I think these types of big games will become very popular in the coming years, especially among kids in cities. Next slide, please. You'll have to excuse me, and I've been ill, so my voice is not perfect. One moment, I'm just going to take a second photo. Again, this is another example of how augmented reality and cell phones begin to mesh. This is actually a tennis game that you can play with phones. At bottom left, you can see two players with their phones out. And again, you overlay graphics on top of the real world. So they're able to come to the tennis court, and the phones become tennis court. And on the screen of the phone, you see this overlaid graphics on top of the real world. So again, I think mobile phones can become a very important part of the future of virtual environments. Next slide, please. This slide shows different examples of text-to-screen in public spaces. The image on the left is a project by the Graffiti Research Lab based here in New York. Essentially, the public can use lasers to draw, say different images on the side of the building. And again, the idea is here that you're overlaying the real world with the virtual world and creating this new type of augmented reality, new way of seeing, new way of understanding the urban spaces around us, whether it's for political means, whether it's a work of art, or about the local public. I think these types of text-to-screen and interactive architecture installations are very important in moving forward and allowing free speech in the public space. Next slide, please. These are some rather common examples of virtual environments, and you may not think of YouTube or MySpace or any of these other video sites as types of virtual environments, but I think it's very important to see these really as the seeds of future virtual environments. These are some of the largest online communities today. Soon enough, we will begin to see these platforms on the sides of buildings, on billboards, in city parks, in museums. And really, you'll begin to see these online communities and it bridge the gap between the virtual and the real. Next slide, please. So for the next part of the installation, I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the research that Studio IMC is doing in immersive environments and stereoscopics. Next slide, please. Again, a bit of a background was given on Studio IMC, but just briefly, we are a New York City-based media agency, headed by myself and my partner Tony Rosario. We're comprised of an international team of artists and software engineers focused on animation, and one of our top artists is my co-collaborator on Parallel Cityscapes, Convergence. And we also produced a big show and art show called the IFTX Building Games for innovation showcasing our artists. The next slide, please. The next slide is really a map of the different types of research that Studio IMC is doing. It's our belief that cell phone, immersive displays, and social software really starting to form the fabric of the next net. What we really believe is going to form the fabric of the next web. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean about the next net in the coming slide. First, I'm going to show you a quick video reel that will show you a range of the different immersive environments and interactive installations that Studio IMC has installed in Times Square and elsewhere. Next slide, please.
Exhibit of high-tech art that you can touch, change, interact with, yet they're all longing for a life outside of museums. This is the second annual Interactive Multimedia Culture Expo, developed by Studio IMC and the NYU School of Interactive Telecommunications.
Don't adjust your TV set, adjust your idea of TV. Studio IMC, a New York City-based agency that represents new media artists from around the world.
Imagine future forms of entertainment.
All of these pieces require active participation.
Sensors along the bottom of the screen here. I can cause different camera movements to
Okay, so definitely some of the examples that you saw there are types of immersive environments we've installed in movie theaters and Times Square and elsewhere, and really are examples of new types of art that are painted. Again, the image that you're seeing on the left side is in a movie theater in Philadelphia. There are voice control, gesture control images, you can speak to characters. Next slide, please. This shows the software that's powering many of the immersive environments Studio IMC is developing right now, called IMC TV, and powers everything from interactive architecture to billboards to plasma displays, and there's cell phone control, gesture control, voice control. And again, the idea is really reinventing public spaces and allowing public participation, encouraging free speech. Next slide, please. This is another project in Times Square right now. Next slide, please. Another in Times Square. this actually is specifically about free speech. The idea is that you send text messages to the billboard in regards to questions. And again, this is, I think, a type of immersion that we'll see more and more, especially in places like New York City, where we have these large billboards covering the side of the buildings. This may not be the best example. I think the Lehman Brothers building is probably one of the best examples of an immersive building in New York, where the screen literally wraps around the entire building. And it really changes your perception of the space. You know, no longer is it sitting towering building. Suddenly you can see through it with clouds and leafy landscapes, and really it changes the entire face of the city, and it really makes it more public. People are able to respond and interact with buildings. You know, instead of it being pure advertising, why not make these billboards art? Why not new types of entertainment and really give them to the public? Right now, I think that things are way too far towards the commercial side. I think one of the things that Studio IMC tries to do in its research and its art is find this kind of happy medium between the two. Next slide, please. And so now to talk a little bit more specifically about parallel cityscapes. And again, I think that all the research we've been discussing are really foundations of parallel cityscapes. This is the work that came immediately before parallel cityscapes called Sonic. This was the Museum TV and Radio at the Chelsea Art Museum. This is an immersive environment with gesture control and self-learning activity. Next slide, please. And so now to talk a little bit more specifically about the work that you're going to see there in the museum. Parallel Cityscapes is an interdisciplinary project that blends media and genres to really try and imagine the expanding frontier of worldwide tech, creating new ways to visualize the huge amount of data that is amassing on websites like YouTube. Next slide, please. The research behind Parallel Cityscapes platform called Space. And this is a 3D search engine for YouTube that essentially allows you to visualize a huge amount of information from YouTube in a 3D space. And I'll explain exactly why that makes sense in a moment. Next slide, please. This is another visualization of a YouTube search, and you begin to see the formation of the parallel cityscapes here. This particular city is actually embedded inside the parallel cityscapes, along with a number of other artworks created by Giannis and myself. And again, you see how it kind of echoes the cityscape. See how it almost looks like the island of Manhattan. Next slide, please. Now, the idea behind 3D search, and the idea behind parallel cityscapes, really came from the ancient art of memory, which basically the idea that our spatial memory allows us to more effectively remember. So to put it more simply, I put this story about Simon. And essentially, the idea is that he was at a banquet given by a nobleman and received a message, had to leave the banquet, and the roof fell. And when he was called back in to identify the bodies, he was able to do so by remembering spatially where people sat. And I think that that's a particularly good example, obviously a current example, next slide, of what ancient art of memory really means. And these are some images from the 1500s that show how image is used as a placeholder for memory, for an idea. Actually, the founder of Second Life put it to me in quite a simple way as well. Philip Rosedale said to me at conference last year, said, how many things do you remember on death? Said, maybe 10 things in my home folder on my desktop. And then he said, how many things do you remember in your home? And I think to myself, well, gosh, the clock by my bed and, it's so thick, maybe 1,000 other things. And suddenly it became so clear to me how much easier it is to remember things spatially. It's precisely because our brains are built for the 3D world. Our eyes are built to see things in stereo. Our brains are built to understand things spatially. So the idea is, again, that next slide, that instead of seeing things in a two-dimensional way, suddenly you can have this bird's eye view of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of videos or scientific papers or artworks or whatever it is that you're searching for in a 3D space, and suddenly you can remember things much more effectively. You can say to yourself, oh gosh, all the 19th century American art is downtown, and all of the 20th century British art, I might find uptown. Again, this idea that our spatial memory really augments the way in which we understand information, the way in which we search information. And again, this is really at the heart of parallel cityscapes. Next slide, please. I think that seeing today's web as a flat web page, as we do, is really much like seeing the cave that in a few years, in 5, 10, 20 years, people will look back at Yahoo and AOL and YouTube and they'll say, gosh, how the heck did people possibly sort through a huge amount of information in a two-dimensional plane? They're really using immersion, and using stereoscopics, and using 3D is really a way to expand and heighten our experience of information, and really a way to heighten the way in which we collaborate and communicate with the web. Next slide, please. So again, this is really putting parallel cityscapes directly next to current day two-dimensional search. And again, you get 6 results on a page for Google, whereas in IoT space and parallel cityscapes, we're literally seeing hundreds of thousands of videos that click. You get this amazing bird's eye view, shifting perceptive, an entirely new way of seeing the web and the information of the people around us. Next slide, please. And this is the second to last slide, and we're going to kind of end on this point. This is a concept developed at Studio IMC by several artists, and the idea is, again, that by blending things like immersive architecture, interactive sculpture, speech environments, mobile phones, that really architecture technology will continue to shape our vision and our perception both on the web and in the physical spaces. And we'll begin to see a melding between our cities and our virtual worlds. Next slide, please. And the question really is, is this type of interactive 3D environment, and I don't want to, by any means say this is what it's going to look like, but I think that this idea that melding virtual and real, visualizing things in 3D space, and stereoscopics, and through immersion, really could end up being web in the city of the future. The web could end up looking more like a video game than a flat web page, more like a city, and like the Yahoo of today. And that's it. Thanks very much.